Good morning, dear colleagues. While our participants are taking their seats, I'd like to state that this year we are holding a session on the Treasury system since we do have some news to share, and we will discuss here today one of our large-scale projects. And of course, all of us have been working on this project for around 10 years. It is the Treasury payment system. This is the main subject that we are planning to discuss here today, and I am glad to introduce our discussion participants. I, head of the Federal Treasury, act as moderator. This is an unusual role for me, and among our speakers we have organizers of this project, those who implemented this project, and of course our main partners. So it is Alla Bakina, Director of the National Payment System Department of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation. Then Vladimir Kolyshev will soon join us. He will be with us for sure. It's Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation. Then we have Tatiana Nesterenko. Her new office sounds a bit unusual for us, but we'll get used to it. It's Deputy President Chair of the Management Board of the Otkritie Bank. Alexei Korobelnikov, Chairman of the Finance Committee of the City of St. Petersburg. Alexei Lyakin, Vice President, Director of Sberbank Treasury. And, of course, Stanislav Prokofiev, Deputy Head of the Federal Treasury. We have prepared a scenario, naturally, and I will try to stick to it for the sake of this session and all of us. Of course, there will be some deviations, but the focus for us is to finish on time. We'll try to stick to the time limit. My first question is to Stanislav Prokofiev. What is the essence of the project of Treasury payment system? The essence of this project, to be brief, is as follows. The first goal is to centralize and consolidate the public funds of the Russian Federation on a single treasury account. This is the first goal. The second goal is to speed up the circulation of money from the public sector of the economy and to optimize lending. And the third goal is to develop cash management, that is to say, financial resources management for the public sector of the Russian economy. I have to say that this project is probably one of the most important and the most challenging projects over the last 20 years. We have proceeded stage by stage. We started in 2001. Tatiana Nesterenko, at that time, created and implemented a large-scale 10-year project for the introduction of the Treasury system, and the whole team worked under her management. We centralized on the central account of the budget all funds that belong to the Russian Federation level, and it was a challenging process. It required modernizing the regulatory framework and the technical infrastructure, and the World Bank as well as the International Monetary Fund helped us in this process, so we succeeded. We developed a single telecommunication network of the Treasury, and we centralized all funds of the Russian Federation first, and from the 1st of January this year, we made a very important step. Now, the single Treasury account has funds of the Russian Federation as well as the 85 regions of the Russian Federation and 2,500 municipalities, that is to say, the whole public sector. And of course, another goal was to optimize lending and accelerate the circulation of funds. Another goal was cash management at a large scale. And what is also important is that we started managing the funds of the Russian Federation regions that before did not have the opportunity to manage those funds at financial markets. And in the first 6 months of this year, they received 6.5 billion rubles income. That's their first income. Thank you very much, Stanislav. Indeed, this project would have been impossible without the involvement of the Bank of Russia. And I would like also to reveal that the initiative of accumulating all the accounts belonged to the leadership of the central bank. And what's crucial here is that we acted together with the central bank. First, we developed a joint concept, and there was an instruction of the Minister of Finance and the chair of the central bank, Elvira Nabiulina, related to it, and the results are quite impressive. Alla, what's your assessment of the result of the project and the course of its implementation? Thank you for this question. I was lucky enough to participate in this project, and of course it was an unprecedented one for us, because although we prepared for a long time and we worked all the details of this project, the active phase of the project was very intense, and we had to amend around 14 information systems. We also amended the regulatory framework, so the scale of this project is massive indeed. What is the result of this transition for us as the Central Bank of Russia? Together with our client, the Federal Treasury, we see that the number of accounts serviced in the system of the central bank reduced. Before, there were more than 45,000 of them, so you understand the operational load that we had to bear. And now we have a single treasury account. Of course, the operational efficiency of processing increased, and there is a number of other benefits that were mentioned by Stanislav. This transition and the implementation of the system of treasury payments, of course, expanded the opportunities of the treasury in terms of placing free cash in banks and commercial sector, and of course the yield also increased. Colleagues have already voiced these figures and will probably voice them again. We also see the increased efficiency of the treasury system and a better integration with the payment system of the Central Bank of Russia, which gives us new opportunities to implement state-of-the-art payment services in our system and new scenarios of budgetary payments. Regarding the results of this transition to the single treasury account, I believe that the biggest progress was that together we managed to make this transition seamless and actually really invisible for all the clients and all the stakeholders. And it's also important that we managed to ensure continuity of budgetary receipts. We did not have any failures, and we were surprised by that as well. That's probably the result of good preparation. So regarding my take on the outcomes of this project, of course, this is a modern, successful, efficient project, and we see good influence on clients, banks, and the country as a whole. We now have a platform in the Federal Treasury with a huge development potential. And for us, of course, this is also an invaluable experience that has shown us that joint work allows to implement fantastic projects. And this is not the only project that we implemented. We are now also working on introducing electronic certificates, and we implemented successfully direct payments from the budget to national payment instruments, and I believe that a lot of projects are ahead. Thank you. Now let's welcome Vladimir Kolochev, who has joined us. And my next question will be to Tatiana. I don't know actually what to ask, because we were mostly answering Tatiana's question in the course of this project implementation. But still, Tatiana, what's your take on the implementation of the project, its results, and its potential for our future changes? Is it my mic? Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed, Roman. First of all, allow me to congratulate you upon the Day of the Financial Expert. This is our professional day, and it's great that we are celebrating this day by this professional discussion. And I wish you good balance at work and at home. And of course, I would like to congratulate you upon the 5th anniversary of this forum. We have here today two parents, so to say, of this forum, one mother and two fathers. It's Roman and Alexei Lavrov, and I'm the mother of the forum because they pushed me so that I agree upon all the stakeholders on the implementation of this forum. It's a great pleasure for me indeed that we can now celebrate the 5th anniversary of this amazing forum, and it's very pleasant for me to see that this project is ongoing and is developing. As was already mentioned, the goals of creating the treasury payment system was to speed up the transactions between the stakeholders. Actually, we don't really have any settlements. It's just that we transfer information. Money is not moving, it's information that's moving. And of course, that reduced the load upon the payment system, which is very good for a large state. Because you mentioned the figure of 45,000, but before that, all the budgetary institutions were participating in the system, and what we did allows to streamline the operations of our payment system. Now, through the system, we can see in real time the overall state of the financial system of Russia, its regions, and its municipalities. And every payment to the state and from the state, including municipalities and regions, is processed using the classification code. As a result, we can see how the resources of municipalities, regions of Russia, we can see how it works. So we can now ensure full traceability of payments, and every flow has its code. Another goal was to consolidate resources on a single account that was already mentioned here today. And the result of that would be getting proceeds from management. We actually did not have the goal of starting earning money on that. That's just a positive auxiliary result that we get for our budget. Another important point I'd like to highlight, and it's quite unprecedented in my 40 years experience, the implementation of this project was very timely and rhythmic. All the regulatory framework was updated on time, and that required huge work on behalf of the Ministry of Finance and the Treasury. Everyone felt their involvement and their responsibility. Our system is large, and the systems of treasury payments are large in general, and it all started with just transferring the budgetary institutions' accounts to the treasury accounts, and that required huge work. And we know that experience of different countries varies. I know that in Kazakhstan, for example, they started the treasury system bypassing all those stages that we prepared for a long time. Then we also separated money from information. We consolidated the federal budget and the state extra-budgetary funds, and now we are at the stage of involving the Russian regions and municipalities. So it is a big, large-scale project. Regarding the conclusions that I can make, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Finance and the Treasury for spreading information about the system and about the state of the budget. And thanks to this system, we can see how the budget is actually spent. What should we pay attention to? With such a resource consolidation of budgets of all levels, there is always the risk of internal loan taking, and we can already see that on the accounts of the budgetary institutions by the end of the year there was less money than according to the books. So there are those internal loans. It's good when we have a lot of money and we can manage that. And I believe that the situation gradually improved for those institutions. Nevertheless, this is an anxiety-generating sign, because we can see this process of internal loans, and we have to track this process because we have a regulatory deficit level for budgetary institutions that we have to control. And according to the law, the accounts of budgetary institutions are independent, so they have the right to the supervisory bodies still have the right to require institutions to provide information about their balance. And of course, we all understand as financial experts that the balance on the account is the result of the budget implementation. On the 1st of August and on the 1st of September, the balance was of around 10 trillion rubles. The budgetary balance is 5 trillion. The budgetary balance of autonomous institutions is 740 billion. The balance of legal entities, 668 billion. And the balance of municipalities is of around 500 billion. I'm not going to analyze everything. I would just suggest analyzing the federal balance. Let's consider the budgetary receipts. 23%. We are all using figures as financial experts, so you will have to listen to some figures. So 20.3% of GDP, and last year it was 17.6. So receipts are increasing. Let us subtract now oil and gas receipts, because the situation is good there. Prices have improved. Let us take non-commodity income, 13.2% of GDP. Last year it was 12.5%. It's good. Oil and gas sector is increasing. The economy is increasing.
And as for expenditures, 19.1 this year. It's less than last year as of 1st of September. And last year we had 20 at the same time. We got more revenues that are not oil and gas by 0.9%. We have less expenditures by about the same percentage. That's how we took it out of the economy, this portion of the GDP. And we need to be looking at the money in the economy compared with the gross domestic product. And we get less money in the economy like that. The situation will change in September, of course, because we'll be making payments to pensioners and military servicemen, and around 700 billion rubles. This is a 30% increase of monthly expenditures, and the balance will go down. But we're talking about around a trillion rubles compared with GDP. If we subtract oil and gas revenues, this is what we need to keep paying, and the balance goes up on the accounts of legal entities as part of the Treasury support, and on the accounts of budgetary organizations. That's 1 trillion 400 million. Financial experts understand that the cash expenditures were not actually made on that. They left the budgetary account, they went to the accounts of budgetary institutions, and they are still within the system. That's 1,400 million. Of course, that has to be done. And the Treasury support is all about target use and of quality, but it's also a question to contractors and those who get subsidies and things like that. If we keep on analyzing it, do we have the understanding of rates of expenditures until the end of the year? To understand these rates of expenditures, it's enough to take a look at the there were assignments made, but it was never used, and now there are still no agreements on millions and millions of rubles, and 915 billion rubles of contracts have not been signed yet. According to our standards, they will have to be signed until 1st of October. We can predict that it will not be used until the end of the year. It will either be transferred to the advancing part and the contracts were not signed, or it will be moved to the next year. That's to calculate liquidity, and the balance at the end of the year will increase. To sum up, when we talk about Treasury payment system, the Treasury payment system works. It meets its goals. It is getting more transparent and clear when we talk about the system of expanded budget, or as I call it, the consolidation perimeter. We have to be extra careful when we talk about lending within the group. We need to understand and we need to stop not to give too many loans to one another. We need buffers to avoid excessive deficit. We take the revenues in, but we don't spend it. It's really hard. I've been in this system for 24 years in the Treasury system and the Ministry of Finance. And to be honest with you, it's really hard to change it significantly. A lot has been done. We need to keep moving forward on that. We need the money to go to the economy. And the Treasury, considering this huge volume of information, we have Russian Federation entities, municipalities, non-budgetary accounts, and we have all the schedules of our expenditures. The payments on contracts were unclear, but when contracts are electronic and when you have the execution day and the payment day, that can also be included into the payment of our cash management. Not, of course, a few organizations follow that, but still it's there. What I'm saying is the Treasury needs to expand the quality of its cash planning for a longer term period. I understand that cash planning is done. The Treasury does its forecasting pretty well, but this cash planning, they just take 1/12 of the entire amount, and that's it. Congratulations to all of you, of those who took part and who created that system. I'd like to thank you for this work. And now we got even greater tasks, but we have experience in meeting all those goals. So thank you, Tatiana Gennadievna. And next question to Vladimir Vladimirovich. In your opinion, the results that the system of Treasury payments created, did it help? If we talk about fiscal and monetary policy, can these tools cope with the challenges that Tatiana was talking about? 10 trillion that she was talking about, is it good or bad? Well, thank you for this question. Let me express my respect to Tatiana in terms of following the budget. Last year, of course, was a special year that the deficit was increased significantly and went much higher than our long-term and mid-term forecasts. and it was done according to the budgetary rules. Non-oil and gas deficit will have to be reduced, and next year it will get to the normal level. Had it not happened, the inflation that we're witnessing now would be at a totally different level. We need to understand this adjustment. This is what was planned by the Ministry and the Ministry of Finance, by the government and Ministry of Finance, to reduce the non-oil and gas deficit, and next year it will be reduced even more and will be put in harmony with the budgetary rules. In that sense, there's nothing unexpected here for the economic agents. As for the 10 trillion that you were talking about, is it good or bad? Of course it's good. First of all, its traceability. It allows the federal authorities and the regional level to understand the problems of following the budget better, to understand the nature of those problems better, and to do something about it. The government is in the more active phase in terms of working with the efficiency of following the budgetary obligations or liabilities that have been approved for the budget on the federal level. We're talking about the provisional zero, when the balance that was transferred every year, and every year it's around 1 trillion rubles. These are all the liabilities that were approved by the parliament, but they were not used in the current year, and that get transferred every year to the next year, due to some of them due to objective reasons, and some of them, of course, could be used more efficiently. And I know, Roman Yevgenyevich, that you keep monitoring it, and you follow all those suggestions from the federal authorities that they make at the end of the year, when they want to somehow use the budgetary obligations that will most probably not be followed this year, and use these funds for other purposes. And it's not obvious at all that even if there's this transfer, they will still be used in the economy. And that's one point. The other point is this risk-oriented approach to every line of the budgetary obligations in the budget, when we understand based on previous years. And this is where we work the monitoring and traceability system of all budgetary obligations, so where they started and why there were risks of not following them, and how it got transformed over the year, and what kind of tools we can use to take these limits or take these funds from certain categories and move them to where they can be moved more efficiently. Another important issue is on, and that is what Tatiana was talking about, is that we need to give the money back, release the money back to the economy as fast as we can. And the commentators keep saying that the expenditures may be uneven throughout the year, and the revenues are also uneven, and that leads to the volatility of the balance at the Federal Treasury. And starting this year, it's not just about the volatility of the federal level budgets, but the volatility of all levels of the budgetary system. In that sense, we need to understand that seasonality is a phenomenon which is typical not just to the budgetary system. And there is seasonality. In December, the activity is always higher than in January and February, and we can still keep on improving the budgetary system, but it's also about how the operations in the budgetary sector impact the banking sector and their liquidity. regardless of the work that will have to be done to improve the rhythm of the expenditures. This is the task that we had in front of us even 5 years ago, to reduce the balance and to reduce the volatility of the balance at the central bank. That gives us the neutrality of operations in the budgetary sector for monetary aggregates and for the banking liquidity, regardless of the budget. Even in some months we get surplus or deficit. It's all offset by the operations of the Treasury, by placement of the free balance, and we can look at the changes in this level year to year. The balance at the central bank, this is what we take out of the economy, and if the budgetary funds are placed in the banking system, it's neutral for the economy, and those balances kept going down. And even though the amount of funds under the management of the Federal Treasury significantly increased starting this year, when the regional and municipal levels were added, still the balance at the central bank goes down evenly, and our goal is in 3 to 5 years we will get to this provisional zero, when those operations will be absolutely neutral for the banking sector. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Tatiana, I hope we answered the questions that were raised. That's correct. From the point of view of forming the budgetary policy, the non-oil and gas deficit this year will have to get reduced, and we can all see that. We can look at those expenditures compared with the law. We used to have 50.4. This year it's 48.8. We work together. I never favored that, and there are no tools to have just this really evenly distributed use of funds. The seasonality has always been there. You have fires in summer and snowstorms in winter. You have December, January pension payments, 3 sellers. January is always dry because you pay everything in December. It's not about how evenly that is spent. It's about whether you can predict it or not, forecast it or not. And here I totally agree with you. We need to make our forecasts much more precise. Okay, distinguished colleagues, 10 trillion is not so bad as we understood. And I looked at our incoming text messages over this amount of time. In spite of this huge balance, the balance at the STA was up to 300 billion rubles. Yesterday it was 815 billion rubles. Where is the rest of the money? The rest of the money is in the market and at the banks and in the economy. Alexei Yurievich, what would be your assessment of the results of this transfer to the new STA, to this single treasury account at the treasury payment system? How did it impact the liquidity of the banking system? Thank you. On my behalf and on behalf of all banks, I can say that this impact was absolutely positive, and it's great that this huge work that was done by the Federal Treasury and all adjacent agencies there, it led to the situation when early in 2021, mostly in February, the banks saw the growth of the amount of funds placed in the banking system of about 3 trillion rubles. That's a huge amount of money, and the banks used it to pay their debt to the Bank of Russia, to increase the liquidity buffers, and to other purposes. It has to be noted here, as we mentioned before, when we have the budgetary revenues, and the budget takes the funds from the clients, and these are the clients of banks. They leave the balance of banks. They are not no longer available for banking operations. The liquidity of the banking system goes down physically and in terms of regulations and standards. What should banks do? They have to go back to the Bank of Russia and attracting money using collaterals and compensate for the money that went to the budget. And if the budget doesn't spend the money for some reason, those that are supposed to receive that money don't spend it, and it is accumulated at the Bank of Russia, and now they need to go back to the banking system through the Treasury. And this 3 million rubles were like a gulp of fresh air, and this work was really useful and something that we needed. The effect was huge. And Alexey Yurievich and Stanislav Yevgenievich, both of you have been dealing with managing liquidity since 2009. Back then we had the single federal budget account, and this year we call it a single treasury account. You have gone through, together with the Moscow exchange, you have gone through a lot of different instruments or tools to manage liquidity. What are our plans in cash management? Please share them with us. In terms of cash management, I have to say, distinguished colleagues, that all the decisions that we make, they are the results of thinking and implementation efforts by three most important financial authorities that are sides of the big financial triangle: the Ministry of Finance of Russia, the Bank of Russia, and the Treasury of Russia. And strategically, we will continue this trend to increase the specific weight of the security or collateral operations and reducing the blank non-collateral operations. The second strategic direction is expanding the so-called collateral base, or the list of the collateral or security assets. If in the past we said that we work only with state securities, starting with the federal loan bonds and euro bonds, and this year we got the DOM RF issued, the so-called mortgage bonds. If we introduce such instrument of placing liquidity as the deposit with the central counterpart, we can reach to any other liquidity using the instruments of the National Clearing Center, using the help of the National Settlement Depository and the Moscow Exchange. We introduced last year this unique tool that allows us, without additional risks to the Treasury, by deconcentrating this risk, to accept as collateral such assets that we accept today, all the way to precious metals and stones.
So this is our reality today, and naturally we are going to build on using collateral instruments. Regarding tactics, until the end of the year we will conduct the first pilot operations. I hope that in October we will already do it. All the previous repo operations were organized beyond the stock exchange, and I would like to thank colleagues from the central bank for this possibility. We are planning to move on gradually to the open market and start implementing the stock exchange repo operations. Until the end of the year, we are also planning to expand the range of our clients, including not just the Russian banks, but also, for the first time, banks with foreign participation. They now have this right. The only important conditions is to make sure that the share of the Russian Federation in the equity is 50% plus one share. We are also going to promote other promising instruments. And now, for example, we are discussing the possibility to reduce the cost of loans for the Russian regions that are now securitizing their debt. And if the Ministry of Finance supports us, we will conduct an experiment with the Committee of Finance of St. Petersburg this year. We will provide our liquidity with a collateral of highly liquid and very reliable securities, that is to say, the bonds of the Finance Committee of St. Petersburg. This is our plan for the future. Thank you. I would now like to finalize the discussion of the tools that we now have. We would like to have a clear set of tools for our partners from the banking system. Taking into account what has been said by Stanislav, perhaps our bank experts have any comments or questions. Tatiana, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but still I would like to draw your attention to the following, dear colleagues. I'm a very young banker, and of course, I'm a person who has dedicated her whole life to the state finance. That's why I would like to mention the following aspect. All the actions of the Ministry of Finance and the Treasury regarding the development of instruments and placing various instruments, we do support all those activities, but taking into account the volume of placement of around 9 trillion rubles, the Federal Treasury is probably becoming the biggest creditor for the banking system. So it is already actually the case. And if we take the financial market participants, do they have the understanding of the policy of those placements? Do they have an understanding of the set of instruments available? Do they have a vision of the conduct rules on this market? The participants of the financial market actually do not have this vision. They do receive some information from the ministry, but overall, when the debt policy is formed and when the schedule of raising funds is developed, usually there is a large-scale awareness-raising policy to the market participants with an explanation of the timeline of the steps forward and so on. And I believed that the community of financial experts could think about making a sort of investment statement to formulate this together with the Ministry of Finance and with the Treasury. We would like to discuss those principles of that investment declaration with the participants of the financial market. We believe that this document should also cover the long-term vision of the quality of those instruments and the timeline of those instruments. We would like this document not just to declare its neutrality, but also to provide additional information to the market players. When collateral instruments are placed, this is not about neutrality for the market. For a financial market participant, this is a more speculative instrument. Of course, it is guaranteed, but the market is more focused on speculation because they can play on the rates. Neutrality exists when there is at least one rule explaining the rules of the game, so that without being a creditor, you could give the financial sector the opportunity to transform it into the credit instruments. I fully support you, Tatiana. So I would just like to draw attention to the fact that there is a lack of understanding of the influence of what we are doing and what we are about to do. Of course, that instruments should explain the risks for the borrower regarding the rankings, regarding capital. Of course, risks have to be explained. There are also some risks of concentration. The amount of placement should not belong to one bank by 70%. The participants need to understand the rules of the game. And once again, going back to the most important thing is to be able to forecast the cash flows. When we see that it's all clear for the market participants, they have an understanding and then they can plan ahead. The financial experts will have a better understanding, and actually the more instruments there are on the market, the more revenue it means for the state and for the stakeholders. We don't want to just make deposits and sit on them. I think that that's not the right way to proceed, but we would like to create more competition. So I would like to draw your attention to this aspect. So perhaps we could think about a document that would provide such an explanation. Perhaps Vladimir will be able to comment on that and tell us whether we will have such a document. I don't know, what could it be called, investment declaration? It doesn't matter how you call it, but the essence of it and the information that you provide there is crucial. Yes. You mentioned a new instrument for us. Perhaps there are some prototypes, but it seems to be quite closed. So, Vladimir, could you comment on that? Well, the biggest reason for it is these 10 trillion. The role of Treasury has increased very significantly for the banks, and perhaps banks do miss transparency in communications. Of course, they can also make some conclusions based on how the situation unfolds and based on what they see, but of course it would be better to have a document setting some principles indeed. I think that it could be a brief document, such as the main guidelines regarding the budgetary policy, regarding fiscal policy, and so on. I would also like to mention that you don't have to worry. You mentioned that the amount of placement is so huge that it's very difficult to track it, but soon it will reduce. This will happen this year for sure. It is related to the fact that part of balance that was formed as of the 1st January last year is temporary, and there is a very significant part that is structural. That means that these are balances of budgets of non-federal level. It represents around 2 to 3 trillion, and this is a structural effect that will probably be there. All the funds of the regional and municipal budgets, as well as budgetary institutions, as well as organizations that do receive treasury support, all of that represents around 2 trillion. But this year we also have a temporary effect. It is related to the pandemic, basically. Last year we had a huge level of uncertainty, and we did not understand whether the economy will be able to cope successfully with the restrictions that had to be introduced during the pandemic. So we borrowed actually more than we needed in reality, because we did not think that the economy would recover so quickly. It is around 900 billion, and this year we will reduce the amount of borrowing by this amount, but in fact we are not really changing it. It is just that we're using the balance of last year that was too big due to the increased borrowing program. So this is one of the factors that will be eliminated from liquidity and from the viewpoint of banks, this is probably even good, because these will be the funds of the legal entities, of individuals, and so on. So perhaps the distribution will be even more even than we have now with funds placed in the Treasury. Same with the pension fund. We did not really understand how the situation will unfold with the receipts of extra-budgetary funds, and to be on the safe side, some balances were formed to avoid risks, to make sure that the social payments could be made. And this year, once again, this effect will be mitigated. It will amount to around 1.5 trillion. But the market participants should not receive this information once per year at the Moscow Financial Forum. As I see it, we should be able to have short-term and medium-term forecasting depending on the funds managed by the Treasury. And this session here today is actually, among other things, an attempt to collect feedback on behalf of the market players, on behalf of the banks, regarding what they would like to see in this document. To be more specific, we have a set of instruments, and they have different maturity terms, and they have different amounts of collateral, and we understand that part of those balances are quite normal, so to say. They are just necessary for regular operations processing in the budgetary system, and this is something that is easily forecasted. In contrast to deposits, they don't have any specific maturity, so they can be withdrawn at any point of time. And we can also see that they are quite stable. There is some seasonality, but at the same time they are quite stable. And when banks, for example, manage funds of legal entities and not individuals, they understand that although their liquidity is very high, and these funds should be available at first request, at the same time they know that they can plan for the long term for them. And it seemed to me that we could actually increase the share of that to 3/4. Regarding the instruments with collateral and without collateral, we have to think about that specifically for two reasons. The first reason is what we discussed with the central bank during our regular meetings. The instruments without collateral impose some restrictions on the participants, because the budgetary system assumes the risks of those participants, and those risks cannot be too high. We cannot risk the funds of the budgetary system to a significant extent. We do assume risks only of very reliable banks. That means that shift towards instruments without collateral will mean that this liquidity will not be evenly distributed in the banking system, and this is what we already know, and this is what we already actually see. So this is the first point, and the second point is that whether these are instruments with collateral or not, whether they are secured or unsecured, for every manager of liquidity, the price matters. So if we see that the risks assumed by the Federal Treasury by placing a higher share of unsecured instruments are well justified in terms of additional income, because we always have this risk-income ratio, then it will naturally stimulate Treasury, and priority will be shifted towards unsecured instruments. For example, there is no interest in the unsecured instruments, and we will see that the profitability of those instruments will be much lower. The profitability of secured instruments will be much lower than that of unsecured ones. So we have to consider all of those factors, and this is a very relevant subject indeed. It is sure that, but yes, please say it louder. Until the end of the year, we will figure it out. Okay, thank you very much. This is also a very nice next step, and we also took several things into account as part of this document, right, Alexei? Yes, I do support this investment acceleration so that banks could plan their liquidity, because this is the foundation of everything. It will be really easier for us to plan the liquidity management of banks if we have this document, because as it has already been said, the Federal Treasury is the biggest creditor of the Russian banking system, so the predictability of the actions of the Federal Treasury is a cornerstone of the whole process. I would like to build on what Vladimir said regarding the distribution between the bigger banks and the smaller banks. The biggest banks, the systemic banks, are the focus of a special attention of the central bank, and there are some liquidity norms that are applied to them. For example, the short-term liquidity norm N26. In terms of placing funds, the form of placement and the maturity, when we get clients' funds, we take into account all those factors, and the norm is either 60% or 100%, and when it comes to repo, it is 0%. So when we make this division between secured and unsecured instruments, the respective norms are applied to secured instruments, and well, when it comes to instruments with collateral, they are not really taken into account by the normative liquidity perimeter. We may have physical liquidity, we may even have surplus, but due to the regulatory restrictions, we cannot really place them. So I have a couple of suggestions there. It would be interesting to maintain a certain stable share of unsecured instruments in the whole portfolio of the Treasury, and we could also think about the term deposits, and we could think about different maturity periods for those tools. And this same mechanism could be also applied for other instruments, because if we set the condition that funds from this account can be withdrawn with a notification within 35 days, that will be considered as a stable instrument. Of course, that will restrict the freedom of the Federal Treasury in terms of managing those funds. That is why this measure will be specifically effective if the short-term loans for commercial banks, for example, to cover for cash gaps are available. That would be a win-win situation. But the most crucial thing is that this mechanism with a notification 35 days before would also be beneficial for the Federal Treasury. As Vladimir has mentioned, banks are more interested in those funds, and competition for those funds would be higher. Therefore, the interest rate for the Federal Treasury for those instruments would be higher as well.
Another idea, when you place your funds through exchange-based repo, I would ask to keep the mechanism of repo with the securities portfolio, which is active now. This is an important issue for the banks due to the methodology of accounting on behalf of the Bank of Russia. Repo with the current mechanism and with the clearing participation certificates is not so good, and it's not going to be used by everyone. Thank you, Alexei Yurevich, distinguished colleagues. We've been talking for about an hour, and we discussed our federal agenda that the Treasury of Russia works with. But it's not just the Treasury of Russia. It's not the only active participant in the monetary market. We're talking about 1,600,000,000,000, which are placed by the Russian Federation entities on the federal deposits. Our colleagues from Moscow are number one here, as they use this important tool of the budgetary or fiscal policy. And with us we have Alexei Alexeyevich, head of the Financial Committee of the city of St. Petersburg. They have a very positive experience of using the liquidity management tools, and some of them were designed together with the Treasury of Russia. Yes, it is true. We've been dealing with liquidity management for a long time, for 17 years, since 2004. Our financial committee began to become part of this process. The first placement were on paper. We quickly realized that it was not convenient either for banks or our partners, and since 2009 it's all done through the exchange using transparent rules that everyone understands. And in recent years we try to keep our eye on what the Federal Treasury is doing. The Federal Treasury is quite active in that field. We may have different goals, but the tools that Federal Treasury is implementing right now are interesting to us as well. With the support of the Federal Treasury, and here I have to sincerely thank you, Roman Evgenievich and Stanislav Evgenievich. We feel your support and your focus on St. Petersburg. In 2019, we tested the repo with the federal securities basket, and now we move to the system of this deposit with the federal counterpart, and this year we will introduce the repo with the floating rate. Anyway, we are watching the best practices that our senior colleagues are using. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's very convenient for everyone. These are clear and transparent instruments. We don't have to think about accounting. It's all it all went through the Federal Treasury. We are like mountain climbers. We are just following in somebody else's steps, and it's quite convenient. We may have our goals, our different goals, and it's just life. If for the Federal Treasury the big number of tools is something that they need to get to their strategic goal to set the STA at 0, for us it's more about the risk management, and we all these funds that we manage can be placed as unsecured deposits, and for us that's one of the most convenient and profitable tools. And Tatiana Gennadievna mentioned there was never a purpose to make money, but for the regions every kopeck, every ruble is important. That's why these revenues that we get by managing the balance gives us additional revenues. Once again, unsecured deposits are the most profitable tool. We understand that there may be different periods and economic downturns, and if we have secured instruments in our arsenal, we can continue making money without stopping those operations, but with smaller risks. We will continue following this practice, and we are trying to implement new elements, and we are now attempting to use neural network, the AI, to predict the balance. We are at a very early stage yet, but I am sure that this approach will allow us to do more precise forecasting. There will be some manual parts of it anyway, but there will be a point of time when we see that this tool works well, and we will be more brave in terms of the terms and amounts that we place. And let me also express a number of suggestions. Some of my colleagues here said that the more market instruments we have, the better. If we look at the regional practices, we see that the use of exchange-based tools, in the past it was more an exception from the rules. Now they use it more and more, but there are still regions that do their placements in a sort of a closed way without using exchange-based tools. They just use email and exchange some sort of information. All those tools that are used by the Federal Treasury, and the most important ones of them, they shall have to be available to all regions. And the infrastructure that is being created at the Moscow exchange and the St. Petersburg currency exchange, here we have to thank the Treasury of Russia and the Ministry of Finance. This entire infrastructure allows us to ensure transparency of this process and the high level of competition and greater profitability. On our behalf, we can offer the resources of St. Petersburg exchange to the neighboring regions like Leningrad region. We invite all our unitary enterprises and all sorts of companies that are fully or partially owned by the city. And in the future, when we create such full-scale sites that work smoothly, they work fine now, but there may be some fine-tuning that is still needed, and the tools are there, and at the legislative level will be able to regulate that. And at the initial stage, we can recommend the regions to use this infrastructure, and later on even say that's enough. You should no longer use just email and go through the exchange. It's a win-win situation. As for the regulations, we have to be really careful about that. We manage liquidity actively, and we see that there are points that prevent us from moving forward faster. Perhaps I can say that all fees and commissions that are charged by the clearing companies, the exchanges, the central counterpart, they will have to be abandoned for government units or companies, because we understand if one party doesn't pay, then the other will pay. It just impacts the rate. But for government entities, these fees create additional red tape and bureaucracy. You have to plan it, you have to justify it, and that's what we need to start abandoning. The President offered an interesting tool that all regions are working on right now. That's the investment and budgetary loans, infrastructure loans. But in the budgetary code, it says that those regions that get those loans can place the funds for no longer than 1 month. And we may have forgotten, but we also want to use this tool, but for us this limitation of 1 month is quite uncomfortable and inconvenient. This is what we can regulate, and there's a separate accounting system on separate accounts, done by Federal Treasury, and there's this gap in the budgetary code. It's just a limitation for placements on bank deposits. We could use that bypass and place all these funds through repo using the central counterpart. And when these norms were written, those tools were not used yet in the budgetary code. This is what we could fine-tune. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Finance. They give us an opportunity to get Treasury support of the funds at the regional level. This is another opportunity for the regions, and here we need to make additional explanations. Can companies that are not part of the budgetary process use these funds, and who revenues, who would be the beneficiary of the process? And I hear this sweet phrase, the budgets of the Russian Federation entities. And that's what the principles should be. But the wording in the budgetary code is not that obvious. And let me support what Stanislav said earlier. If the Ministry of Finance supports us, we will be part of the of that pilot project to expand the basket to secure the repo operations. If we add federal bonds there, at the initial stage, they can be bonds with the credit rating equal to the sovereign ranking of the Russian Federation. Now we have about $500 billion rubles worth of such obligations, and some of that is issued by St. Petersburg. Here we're all in favor of that. If our colleagues support it, we'll be glad to be part of that pilot project that will lead to the reduction of loan rates, and that's the offer that is beneficial to all stakeholders. We have to comment on those last 2 points that we heard on those repo with the bonds of the Russian Federation entities. And there was a more general question: is there a potential to synchronize or harmonize the mechanisms of placing the funds of the Russian Federation entities? I think there was this hint in the question that the Federal Center somehow limits the freedom of managing liquidity for the Russian Federation regions, and only the funds that the region did not place go to the STA. But when we talk about the funds of the Federation sent to the Russian Federation entity as a transfer, or as target budgetary loans, of course, this is the money of the Federation, and there you can have no freedom in terms of how the Russian Federation entity can manage these funds. Otherwise, we will be creating these bags to simply put the money in, but only to attract the funds. No, we want to avoid the situation like that. That's why the budgetary code contains such norms. As for expanding the security assets and list, and when we talk about federal loan bonds of 15 trillion, and banks have about 75% of that, and in principle that's enough for all purposes of managing liquidity. And I'd say that if we're talking about using repo with clearing certificates, and where the risk is acceptable for the Federal Treasury, especially since the Bank of Russia is supporting us there, and that's one thing. But if we say that the security for the regular EPO and use the bonds of the Russian Federation entities as the collateral, there can be complicated discussions here, because it will complicate and it may lead to bad events, like the default of the bank that used such a loan. And it's also a matter of relations between different levels of the budgetary system. And another point is that the liquidity of this market segment leaves much to be desired compared with the federal loan bond segment. Here we have to consider all the risks carefully. Stanislav Evgenievich, as for St. Petersburg currency exchange, we do use two exchanges, and considering the discussions that we had with the banks and etc., are you closing the gap with the Moscow exchange? Yes, we use services of the Moscow exchange and St. Petersburg currency exchange, and I have to say that we see that the Moscow exchange provides excellent services to us and other clients, and we'd like to thank the Moscow exchange for the long-term cooperation. The exchange in St. Petersburg, basically, they have restarted operations only recently, and as we follow the instructions from the Ministry of Finance, we are moving some of our important operations there to help that exchange develop. They have Promsvязь Bank as their new majority shareholder, and together with the leadership of the exchange and with that bank, we are developing the overall approaches, and this is bringing its fruit already. Both Moscow and St. Petersburg Currency Exchange are partners with whom we have SLA agreements on the quality of service that they provide to us and the clients, and they are managed and they are followed. We had no failures in providing the services and managing the operations for many, many years. And as for the client service in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that's what the bankers keep telling us about, we hope that the new shareholders and new managers, using the help of the Treasury of Russia, if necessary, in the next 1.5 or 2 months, will make a significant breakthrough and will get to the level which we get at the Moscow exchange.
Yes, let's hope for that. Dear colleagues, we have 10 minutes left until the end of our session, and we have made an overview of the journey that we've had, and of course we would now like to peek into the future, at least until the end of the year and perhaps even further on. So, wrapping up our session, I have a question to the discussion participants, first of all to Alla. Alla, we are not using the word payment system. We are not a payment system. We are a transaction system. We are a large transaction system that provides services on processing budgetary payments to the participants of the system of budgetary treasury payments, and we also have now some new terms like direct participants of the treasury payment system or indirect participants of that system. What are the prospects of interaction between the central bank and the treasury in the middle term perspective? Thank you very much for this question. When we are summing up things, we of course have to look forward and to understand where we are going. And I think that we have already quite a lot of joint plans, so it would be important to implement them successfully as we did before. You know that the speed of technology development and modernization development is higher today. So the needs of the society in terms of how soon the society would like to get it also sets the speed for responding to those challenges. In March, the Central Bank of Russia adopted a 3-year development strategy until 2023. That's the strategy of the national payment system development. And the key areas and the key goal of that system is, first of all, to provide convenient payment services to the population, businesses, and the state. And in the context of the state development, the Federal Treasury is among our key partners. There are several joint areas of development, and we already have some plans regarding what to do in those areas. First of all, we'd like to leverage the interaction between the Federal Treasury and the system of treasury payment and the system of financial messages. When it comes to state accompanying the public contracts, and I hope that in 2022 we will start using that, and overall it should enhance the efficiency and streamline those operations. Regarding the faster payment system, this is a project that is developing quite well, and it's important for us to actually develop the state-based aspect, making those payments through this faster system of payments, transferring information instantaneously, will mean that the state services will be provided to the population with a high quality and faster. We also have the C2G payment project that we are developing, and in 2022 we are planning to implement a pilot project in this area, and we hope that it will be quite successful. There are also some new international standards. For quite a long time we have been preparing to implement those standards. Transition to this standard, not just in Russia, not just in the banking community, but overall for the national payment system and in the international practice, will of course contribute to seamless interaction, to the increase of interoperability, to implementing end-to-end processes and overall streamlining of those processes. We have to move on stage by stage, and this project will cover us, the central bank, the Federal Treasury, the banking service sector, the budgetary institutions. So we have to provide comfortable conditions for this transfer and the adoption of this international standard. This is also a prerequisite for success of the transition. I would also like to highlight the subject now being widely discussed. This is the use of digital currency, the digital ruble, and its implementation by the central bank. All the stakeholders can get benefits from the implementation of this project. This will reduce operational costs and also increase the efficiency of functioning of the treasury system of payments through the use of smart contracts, through the possibility of the so-called money coloring and control of the movement of extra-budgetary funds. Of course, digital ruble will allow to optimize all that. We also have to determine the right spheres of application to processes to determine the transactions where those tools could be used most efficiently. We are also moving on stage by stage. Within this project, we have started with the banking sector. We started prototyping of the system, and at the beginning of next year, with a group of the pilot banks, we will start adjusting the processes and testing them, and we have already started a dialogue with the Federal Treasury. Of course, there will be some differences between what we do with the Treasury and what we do with the banking sector, and it's important to streamline all that. So we do have a lot of plans indeed, and I hope that we will stick to those plans, that we will track the progress, and that we will then celebrate the success of those projects. Thank you very much, Alla. Dear colleagues, we have 3 minutes left. Of course, we see the main idea. We have to act jointly. This is a prerequisite for success. So we have 3 minutes left, and I would like Stanislav to wrap up our session, and I would like to ask the question that is of interest to everyone. What will be the income this year? While Stanislav is reflecting upon this question, I would like to give the floor for a question from the audience. Thank you very much indeed for this very constructive discussion. It has been quite interesting, and I am not really involved in this single treasury account subject, but it is very interesting. I have the following comment. The Treasury, together with the Ministry of Finance and with the central bank, increased the money turnover speed. If the basic performance of the supply and demand remain the same and the turnover speed is increased, there will be very high inflation pressure. That means that the money supply is bigger. So did you provide for any compensation for any dampers except for increasing the policy rate? Perhaps we could think about some partial withdrawal or some other means. This question is beyond the subject of our discussion, and I, as a moderator, suggest that we stick to the subject of our discussion, especially taking into account that this week is a week of silence on behalf of the central bank. And answering this question will have probably some consequences for the person who answers. So I revert once again to Stanislav. So what will be the tangible benefit of this single treasury system this year? Well, actually, experience is the criterion of success of a theory, and this is the first full-fledged year of the operation of the single treasury account. Over the last 12 years, we also have been building the cash management system, so perhaps the amount of income will be the main criterion for success, and it will be the first time when I declare publicly, cautiously, the figures that we will reach, I hope. If you are tracking this subject, the previous record in terms of the revenues was last year. It was 192 billion rubles, and taking into account all of those innovations, we expect that this year we will collect at least 250 billion rubles. That means 1/4 of a trillion of budgetary revenues. That's at the federal level. What about the regional level? Well, regions represent a different entity, of course. Until this year, they did not get any revenue from managing that liquidity, and I'm also going to be cautious here, and I'll say that we will try to make sure that this year, the cumulative income of the regional budgets of the Russian Federation will be at least 20 billion rubles. And, dear colleagues, that's just a mere coincidence, but nearly 1 week ago, we reached a very important psychological milestone. Over the whole period, from the beginning of those liquidity management operations, and we started them in April 2008. So by the 1st of September, we reached an important milestone. The federal budget received from the Treasury 1 trillion rubles of income this year. So that's the first Treasury trillion to our home country. That is the milestone that we reached. So this is a very wise policy on behalf of the Ministry of Finance regarding the liquidity management. Thank you very much to all the discussion participants. Thank you very much to our audience that has spent these 1.5 hours with us. We have great progress and great plans, and we will only be able to manage to reach our goals together. Happy financial